Guys, and I appreciate you guys welcoming me back to your lecture series. I don't know what kind of training people are doing right now, but I think just the whole COVID thing, and we all knew it was coming, this quote unquote second wave, with the start of schools. Everyone is reintroducing themselves to each other, and now COVID's basically shut down everything again. So we stopped training, but we'll see what happens. Or at least we have been on and off with our training. How are you guys doing? Are you?
We did the same thing. Well, so the week before Thanksgiving, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, we officially called it. So Maryland saw a crazy spike, and then not a week later, Virginia was seeing similar numbers. So
Right.
We're suspended until at least January. We figured with Christmas and the holidays and stuff, we were like, it doesn't make sense to have in-person classes when we can easily do stuff like this.
Yeah. So for us, well, I mean, yeah, so Wisconsin's numbers are going back down, so that's a good thing, I guess. But we had a really rough patch in there for a while. And then, of course, some of you who are my Facebook friends know that my whole family just got it. So, and probably including me, but I haven't taken my test yet because I have somewhere important to be soon, and I want to take my test before that to see if I can be at that important place. But anyway, so that's that. What I'd like is for us to do another round of introductions, although we probably don't need to introduce people who have been here before. If you just want to say your name, where you're from, and that you know, either that you were at the other lecture that we did, or that a little bit about yourself, your martial arts background and stuff like that. And video is encouraged, although you know, I understand lots of people you know, may have misgivings about it, but I'd like to see the people I'm talking to. It helps me you know, more readily access whether or not you guys are getting something of value from what I'm saying. But then Marlene is always enthusiastic, so if you just leave me with Marlene, then I'm sure that everything that I say is going to be great, and everyone's going to be super happy with it. So yeah, so let's go around, and we'll start with Nat Hornbostel.
Okay, I'm figuring out Zoom slowly. Hello, my name is actually Josiah. I've been studying here with James for about like what, 2-3 months now.
Sure.
So my fencing experience is relatively pretty new, but I'm excited to join you guys.
Great. Thanks. Eric.
Hey, I'm Eric Avila. I've been with the CKDF for about 4 years. It's my first time with the video classes with you guys. James, I actually was there when you came. Dog, silence. I was there when you came to our club and did a class, and I've managed to smear tape adhesive all over my camera because I never use it. So that's probably an improvement. I'm pretty ugly.
Okay, great. Thanks, Eric. Drew, you want to share a little bit about yourself?
My name is Drew. I live in Racine, Wisconsin. I started practicing at James's club at the beginning of the year, just looking for something interesting to do to stay fit. Have zero martial arts experience or background prior to that, but it's been a lot of fun.
Cool. Thanks. Elizabeth?
Liz Suko. I've been with CKDF for about 4 years, maybe coming up on 5, somewhere around that. Previous martial arts experience, a little bit of Olympic style fencing in college, and a little bit of karate before that.
Great. And when did you get into fencing, did you say?
About 4 or 5 years ago, 4-ish.
Great. And you've been with Capital KDF the whole time?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
They're the only club that's accessible by public transportation, so.
Right. Gotcha. Great. Thanks. Who's Capital Kunstfechtens?
That's just the mod room. You're fine.
That's a matter. Joe. That's Joe. We know Joe.
Yeah, Joe Lilly, I've been with CKDF for about 5 years, and I was at the last one.
Great. And Scott?
Hey, Scott By. I've been with Capital KDF for just a few months, and then the pandemic hit. So I've been joining in on some of the video lectures, trying to absorb some information. I did about a year of Chinese swordsmanship before that. That's all.
Oh, great. Wow. Very cool. How did you explore Chinese swordsmanship?
There was a school run by a guy named Scott Rodell, who does Chinese swordsmanship, and he does some of the historical stuff and various traditions as well.
So does he do, so I know a lot of Chinese swordsmanship is very much forms martial art, less focused on combative sparring and more focused on lots of intricate movement patterns like Tai Chi with sword kind of stuff. Is that the kind of stuff that you're talking about?
He kind of does both. So he does the forms, and he'll sort of pass on the forms because that's part of the tradition. But he's also translating and sort of reconstructing some of the historical manuals as well. Sort of taking similar to a HEMA-ist approach.
Wow, that's super cool. All right, and Brent. Everybody knows Brent.
Yeah. So I was at the last lecture, but I'm Brent. I live in Maryland. I've been with Capital Kunstfechtens for about 5 years now. And yeah, that's me.
Great. Cool. Thanks, Brent. All right. So I don't know who else we can expect, but I suppose that as time goes by, more people will likely be popping in, or not. But that's fine. So this would be cool. What we're gonna do today. So last lecture, we did a broad overview of sort of physical training and sort of the way that the medieval and Renaissance mind that would have been sort of current in terms of the arts that we're practicing today, that would have been contemporary with the authors of the various manuscripts and manuals that we're reading to reconstruct from, how those people viewed physical fitness and what some of the parallels are with regards to the way that we sort of conceive of physical fitness, and what some of the ways that we diverge from the medieval mind and the Renaissance mind. Some of the neat insights that we can sort of learn from ways that medieval people and Renaissance people trained, and to try and take sort of using our modern perceptual framework, right? And by modern, I don't mean like I don't mean like our contemporary sort of here in the 21st century perceptual framework. I mean like the radically different perceptual framework of modernism, which is a sort of post-16th century phenomena, as compared to the medieval way of thinking, which Bob is my resident, and my guys know who Bob is. Bob is my resident medieval philosopher, so he's always useful to like point at and have talk about various things that are different. So we don't get to experience that today, but I'm sure if he were here, he would say things about how differently they conceived of the world and how they framed it in very particular terms that we don't, and how we frame things in very particular terms that they don't, and how we can sort of maybe use some of our understanding of the activities that they engaged in to try and discover things about the way that we're doing things that we may have missed if we kind of approached it from our modern framework. And I think that there's some valuable information there. But today's lecture is going to be radically different from that, right? So last time's lecture was very much a broad discussion and bouncing ideas off of each other kind of thing. This lecture today is going to be fairly cut and dry. We're going to talk about, I'm going to give you guys lots of information. I'm going to talk to you guys about some of the ways that I use the information personally and try and help set you guys up for using the information yourselves, right? And so the specific topic that we're covering today is developing your own physical training program, right? So as fencers, we are athletes and we are martial artists, and both of those sort of fields of study or hobbies, activities require a very high degree of physical fitness in order to be successful at them, right? Which is funny because when we go to sword fighting class, or at least when my guys will tell you when they go to sword fighting class, and probably capital KDF as well, we don't really spend a lot of time on the physical training and conditioning part of what it means to be a martial artist or an athlete, right? We do focus on technical movement patterns, right? And so that obviously the technical movement patterns that we're working on require some physical competency. In order to do a technique correctly, you have to be able to use your body correctly, you have to have proprioception, and you have to have basic strength and requirements met, right? But for the most part, once you've kind of achieved that, we leave you alone and expect that you're going to take care of this other stuff that you need to take care of to be successful by yourself. So by a show of hands, and you can just raise your hand on the little, I don't know do we all know how to raise our hand on the right hand side? Just raise your hand if you engage in some form of specifically programmed physical training outside of your martial arts class. So, and then you guys can raise your hand on if those without video can raise your hand virtually. I'm hoping that the only reason, okay, there you go. Brent did it before the pandemic. I'm hoping that the reason that not everybody's hands are being raised is because you are all illiterate when it comes to technology, the technology that we're using here. But I have a suspicion that maybe you're not. And the reason that you're not raising your hand is because you don't engage in a specifically programmed physical training regimen. And by that I mean that could be anything, right? So like that could mean, I'm reading the chat by the way, guys. So if you're not seeing the chat, then and you see me burst out in a fit of laughter, then it's probably for that reason. Yeah, so that could just mean you run on a regular, like Drew. I know what my guy Drew, who's here, he runs on a regular basis, and he integrates physical training in his lifestyle, right? So he forces himself to bike to work, and then that he gets some kind of physical training that way, right? And all of that, it would be something. So don't kick yourself too much. But anyway, so what I'm going to suggest to you is that to be a good athlete and to be a good fencer, that it requires a very high degree of physical fitness, right? And by physical fitness, there are various categories that we can talk about that you can be fit, and that's what we're going to go over today. But I think in general, what we should kind of begin with is the idea that we have to take responsibility for our physical training, right? And that we have to approach it in a similar way that we would approach either our job, or the way that we focus on the techniques and swordsmanship, or the way that we would sort of devote ourselves to some kind of video game or whatever it is that we do in our spare time, right? We like really think hard about the things that we're doing and try and be economical and try and be efficient and try and do things well. And I think it's easy to forget about that sort of mindset, or to not approach physical training with that sort of mindset, because it's hard. I mean, I think that's the real reason for me anyway, is because it's hard to train, because it demands that you do things that make you uncomfortable. That's kind of, it's within the essential nature of resistance training and conditioning, to put yourself in a place that's uncomfortable. But that being said, so it's important to me that we program our training in a way that makes sense, that is targeting the correct parts of our bodies in the correct ways, so that we can optimize our bodies for fencing. Or at least that's sort of where I'm at. That's what I'd like to do. And presumably you guys being here are in the same boat, that you're interested in pursuing a path to sort of enhancing your physical attributes, and you want to do so in a systematic way, and you want to do so in a way that's tailored for the activity that you want to be prepared for, which is fencing in this context, right? So so the next thing that I would say is that, I mean, I suppose we could just jump right into it. Did anyone have any questions for me before we go on, or anything to add? All right, cool. So the first thing that I want to talk about is I want to talk about the broad training program, right? So very often people go to a gym, they get excited about being physically fit, and they decide, okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the gym, and I'm going to be a person who goes to the gym because I'm going to get X, Y, and Z benefit, right? We're all told the benefits that we're going to get from going to the gym. And you show up and you don't really know what you're doing, and you don't really have a plan. And I think having a plan is the very first piece of advice that I'd give anyone who's interested in physical readiness, is to have a plan with what they're doing. I remembered now what I was going to say, so we'll get back to having a plan real quick. The difference between having our body physically optimized for fencing and then being a good fencer, right? I want to talk a little bit about that difference, right? Which is that, hi, Tybee.
Yep, hello.
How are you?
Pretty good, how are you?
I'm well. Would you like to introduce yourself real quick?
Hi, I'm Tybee. I'm from Liberty Sword Club in Jersey City, and nice to see everybody.
Great. How long have you been fencing?
Sucks. Woo, COVID sucks.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I agree.
How long have I been fencing? 5, 6 years, I think, at this point. Yeah, almost 6 years. I also do parkour, and I did Hanga Kung Fu before that.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And also, I think we had one more person show up before I got started. Jay Zeig.
Justin.
Hey, yeah, this is Justin.
Hi, Justin.
Been doing HEMA. Hey, been doing HEMA for, gosh, what is it? 4 years now? I keep wanting to say 2, but I've been saying that for 2 years now.
Right. Awesome. Okay. So we're going to talk real quick about the difference between being an elite athlete and a good fencer, right? So we talked about the fact that fencing requires some degree of physical competency, right? So I mean, like, we just know that it requires some degree of physical competency. You need to be able to move your body in certain ways to perform techniques correctly, right? And there's a difference in terms of having the physical skills. So, for instance, like, timing and rhythm is different than speed, right? Accuracy, precision is different. Is different than quickness. There are skills that are more about your particular fencing abilities than they are about your physical attributes. And anyone who's fenced with me or knows me, or people from my club, know that I I encourage a very, very, very lazy style of fencing, right? So it's my view that the fencing that we do should be the most economical fencing that you can do, and that's for lots of reasons, right? But that's not to say that it's the perfect system. I don't want to suggest that you know, that you couldn't approach fencing from the perspective of, I'm just going to be as fast and as powerful and as overbearing as I can and overwhelm my opponents that way. I don't think that there's anything wrong with that. It's not what I sort of regard as good fencing for me, but I don't think that it's necessarily bad fencing. It's just a different approach. It's, you know, one way of thinking about it is like, what's a better approach in boxing, right? So Mike Tyson and Roy Jones just fought on Saturday, and I was very, very excited. I really enjoyed the fight. It went about as well as it possibly could have, because they're both in their 50s. It's probably the first time that two former undisputed champions fought each other in their 50s in history, and no one got hurt, and it went the whole 8 rounds, and so there it was. But you know, they had very, very different styles. Mike Tyson is a swarmer. He's an in-fighter. He has really good head movement, and he gets inside, and then he hits you to the body, and then he eventually hits you in the face. That's how he wins fights. Roy Jones, he fights way outside. So what I would call the Sufectin, right? He fights outside of the distance where Mike Tyson is effectively able to hit him, and he just keeps on dancing around that Sufectin. And he was able to do it because he had such an explosive way of entering into the Kree that he could overwhelm his opponents with quickness. And so those are two different styles of fencing, right? Those are two different styles of boxing. Those are two different styles of fencing. Neither one is better than the other. These are two fighters who made their way all the way up to the highest level of boxing in their respective weight classes, and were undisputed champions. And Roy Jones was the best fighter in the world, pound for pound, for 10 years. So, you know, what's better, swarming or outfighting like Roy Jones? Like, the answer is that's not how it works. Like, there's what's better for you, right? So yeah, so I would start by saying that what it takes to be a good fencer doesn't have to rely on the development of your physical attributes, but it also can rely on the development. Like, you can make that sort of your way of learning how to fence. But I would also say that ceteris paribus, right? So to suggest that with all things being equal, if I'm fencing myself and one of me is super fit and the other one is not very fit at all, then I'm going to put my money on the one that's fit, right? So like, you know, even if you spend all of your time focusing on technique and a style of fencing that doesn't require a lot of explosive power, explosive energy, that at the end of the day, you're still going to be a better fencer if you improve in those areas, in those dimensions. Like, that's just, you know, with all things being equal, you're going to be a better fencer by doing that. The question you have to ask yourself is, am I losing by not devoting myself to learning to be a better fencer by focusing more on technique? And I think the answer to that question is, you're probably not losing that much, because you probably don't spend all of your free time becoming a better fencer by improving your technique, right? I don't believe that anyone here spends all of their free time doing that. I think that most of us play some form of video game for a while every day, or you know, to some degree, read a book or watch TV or whatever it is. It's mostly sitting on our butts, right? And so I'm not suggesting don't spend the time that you could be training and sparring and working on technique and drilling with your partners, and take that time and spend it working out. I'm not saying that. I'm saying take the time that you spend on your butt, which we all can point to right now, and take some of that time, and how much is going to be up to you, some of that time to improve yourself physically. All right, so the best way to do that is, in my view, right, the best way to do that is to do it efficiently. And the reason that I think that it's helpful to do that kind of thing efficiently is because if we don't do it efficiently, we're not going to get gains right? Whereas, come on, you're supposed to, I'm talking to you, Brent, you're late. You're supposed to like gains and all caps in the chat room. Point. All right, there we go. Thanks, Brent. So you're not going to get gains if you're not training efficiently, and you're going to be working really hard. And when you work hard and don't achieve anything, that is very invalidating. What's that? Hi, Becky.
Hi there.
I'm sorry.
How are you?
We're good. Shanti and Becky are here.
Okay, great. And I think you guys were here last time, so that's good enough as far as introductions go. Okay, so if you're not being validated by what you do, right? If you're working really hard, you're going to the gym and you're not making any gains, you're not going to want to do it, right? It's not the kind of thing that you're going to continue devoting all this time to. You're just going to feel like, all right, I'm not making any progress here. It's not having any impact on my fencing. I'm not feeling better, right? The best way to train to do anything, in my view, is to do it in a way that gets you a little bit of success, right? Because the validation is the motivation, right? So, and some people are more strongly willed than others. I'll give people credit where it's due. Those who are more strongly willed than others might spend a couple of years not making any progress at all before they realize that they just need to pack it in. But I think in that case, I would say, well, wouldn't you want to do it better? Wouldn't you want to do it in a way that you can spend that amount of time and make progress too? Right. So we're going to talk. So that's what we're going to talk today. That's my introduction to this discussion, and we're going to begin by saying, okay, the overarching theme of what we're going to talk about is going to be how to segment our training, right? So we have very specific areas that we want to develop, and we have very specific ways that we want to develop them. So what I was going to say about people who go to the gym, they show up, they lift a bunch of weights. They don't necessarily lift them in a way that's going to get them progressing in terms of their strength, or their power, or their conditioning in those areas, and it becomes sort of a waste of time, right? And a lot of times, all they had to do was just divide their training up in a way that was synergistic, right? So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is microcycles, mesocycles, and macrocycles. You guys can write that down if you have pads. This is probably there's probably going to be a lot of writing down, right? And this falls under the broader category of periodization, right? So basically, the idea that our macrocycle, sort of the largest cycle that we're dealing with, the superordinate category of our training, right, is going to be composed of various mesocycles. And each mesocycle might be 4 to 6 weeks. It'll all be individual, but you should divide your macrocycles up into mesocycles of approximate lengths of 4 to 6 weeks apart. And then a microcycle, we can think of those as sort of like the specific training cycle that we're doing in that day, right? So let's say our first training session might involve a group of exercises. Let's say it's some kind of squats and maybe some pull-ups and maybe some we might do chin-ups. So then we might do some rows and some bicep stuff to go with that, or whatever, right? So we're covering all our bases there. The microcycle is, how many reps and how many sets for all of those exercises, and what the intensity is for all of those exercises, right? And that's gonna change over the course of the mesocycle. So the mesocycle is sort of the middle stage, right? The 4 to 6 week period, where you're working those specific groups in a variety of different ways, but you're working the same groups, and you're working them you're sort of upping the intensity as time goes by, so that you're getting better at the movement patterns that you're training, right? So over the course of the mesocycle, you're probably going to do lots of repetition of the exercises that you would do with in any given microcycle, right? So if I do on Monday, I do my pull-ups and my squat, or my chin-ups, my squats, and my barbell rows, or whatever it is, the T-bar rows. So next week, or maybe even by the end of this week, I might repeat that to try and improve, to try and make some gains, some strength gains there, right? And so I'm going to change the way that I engage in those exercises over the course of my mesocycle, right? So whereas maybe in the beginning of my mesocycle, I'm doing a set of 10 pull-ups times 3 or times 5 or whatever we're doing, right? By the end of my mesocycle, I'm doing maybe 3 sets of 5 weighted pull-ups, right? So now I'm upping the intensity, right? And so that's happening within the mesocycle. And what we're getting is, we're getting systematic variation of volume and intensity. So write that down too. Systematic variation of volume and intensity. So what I'm trying to discourage right now for you guys is the idea that, let's say you want to get better at squats. Someone says, okay, well, I want to do squats. How do I get better at squats? And then Brent says, squats are the best. And then where's Brent? Brent, you're sleeping on me. There we go. Thanks, Brent. So you say, all right, I want to get better at squats. So what do I do? And then you do, okay, so someone says, well, you should do 3 sets of 10. That's what you do. You do 3 sets of 10. And then they're like, okay, well, how long? You're like, well, you just keep doing 3 sets of 10, right? You do squats, you take a day off, you do something else, you take a day off, you do squats again. And then you just keep on doing 3 sets of 10 until what? Until what? And the answer really often is like, until, like, I don't know. There is no answer. We're not thinking that far out. We know that we're supposed to do 3 sets of 10 because that's the best. That's what we've been told. That's wrong, right? Like, we know that now. That's not an efficient use of our training. That what we ought to be doing is varying degrees of intensity and volume. So when we say 3 sets of 10, what we're really saying is that you're going to do the weight that you can rep 10 times, right? That's what 3 sets of 10 means. Like, you shouldn't be doing the weight that you can rep 20 times if you're doing 3 sets of 10, right? Does that make sense? Everyone tracking on that, right? But that's not going to change your volume or intensity, right? So the intensity of the exercise is how difficult it is, right? So if you're doing the weight that you can rep out 10 times, that comes to right around an 8, probably, right? Because when I say an 8 to 10 on an intensity scale, right? So if that comes in right around an 8, and you're doing that over and over and over again, you're not varying the volume and intensity. You're doing the same amount of weight, total volume, the number of reps by, the number of reps you're doing by the weight that you're doing, right? And you're not changing the intensity. So, maybe what would be more useful is a variation in that intensity. Maybe you begin by doing a real low volume or real high volume, low intensity day, and then, follow that up with a high volume, or, whatever the opposite of what I just said. I can't even remember, but you get what I'm saying, right? So, and what I'm going to suggest is the most important thing is to do that, is to vary the intensity. Now, what works for everybody is going to be different, and I'm going to tell you, I follow a fairly traditional periodization program, which involves, at the beginning of my mesocycle, so mesocycle, right, 4 to 6 week period of working a particular exercise, I begin with the lower intensity, higher volume stuff. So maybe if I'm talking about squats, maybe I'm doing 200-pound, squats, and I'm doing that times 10 or whatever. I do my 200 times 10, or maybe I just do 135 times 10, right? And then I do 5 sets of that or 3 sets of that. And then as I continue on throughout my mesocycle, I gradually lower the rep range that I'm in. So I'm going from a 10 rep range to a 8 rep range to a 6 rep range to a 5 rep range or a 4 or 5 rep range, right? And by the time I'm in that 4 to 5 rep range, right? Now I'm way up. You know, I'm much closer to my max rep, my max weight. That I'm at 80% or so of my max, whereas maybe I started at 50% or even less of my max weight, right? So
And you're varying these weights and rep counts every time you work out. So you would start at the 10 and do 10 for like a week, and then up the weight, decrease your reps.
Yeah. So if we say, so it's going to depend on the size of your mesocycle, right? Because that's going to determine how many days that you're working with a particular exercise. So like if I'm doing a 6-week cycle of strength training, strength specific training, then within that 6 weeks, I might do a week and a half of one rep, and then I might do a week after that and lower the rep. Then I might do another week after that. As far as what the specific program is, there are lots of awesome programs online for anyone to kind of mess around with. This really gets back to the idea that everything has to be something that works for you, right? So, and not just physically works for you, but in terms of recovery and in terms of psychology, right? Like it really, it sucks so bad. I think I said this in my last lecture, and I think I'll say this again in my next lecture. I hate squats, even though they're the best, right?
Deadlifts are way better.
Being under a bar, right, that weighs however many hundreds of, like, more than I do, and the bar is like this thin, 1.25 inch thick metal rod, like laying on my back, and that sucks. There's nothing that sucks worse than that in the world for me. And so, like, psychologically, if I always did that kind of training, right? If I always said, all right, I'm going to do 5 by 5, or I'm going to do 3, I'm going to do 5 sets of 3 to 4 reps, right? Underneath a bar that's heavier, that's heavier than twice my weight or whatever, I'm not going to make it past the first week, right? So, and that's just the psychological part of the game. So there's a lot of reasons why variation and systematic variation in training, in volume and intensity are going to have positive impacts on our gains, beyond just like the physiological stuff that's happening, right? But I think the main point that I wanted to say was that you're going to have these mesocycles. We're talking about, like, how do I approach, like, my training from the perspective of sort of the grand scale, which is like, where do I want to be? What do I want to prepare for, right? And so the mesocycles are going to be determined by the types of things that you're going to achieve, and they're going to be lengthened to a period that's long enough that you can make some reasonable progress within those areas, right? So the one that we talked about already, we talked about our first mesocycle as being sort of a strength mesocycle, and we'll come back to that because that's sort of the foundational. That'll be one of the foundational areas to develop yourself physically, right? Is just in terms of your raw strength. And we talked about that last time too, right? So within our first mesocycle, we're going from, we're doing exercises that are focusing on strength. So that's in our mindset, right? All of the work that we're doing is going to be concerned with increasing our ability to lift heavy shit, right? And do it as many times as we can, and do it with as high numbers as we can. Like that's going to be our first mesocycle, and it's for a lot of reasons, right? But so we program that mesocycle, that 4 to 6 week period, to improve gradually in those areas. So I'm not going to go. So what I'm not going to do is I'm not going to do. 1 week I do squats, right? And I'm focused on squats, right? And then the very next week I'm doing jump squats. You know what I mean? Like, give yourself some time to improve in the areas that you're trying to improve in. So begin with your squats and work your squat. And when I say jump squats, I mean jump squats are a very particular power focused or power centric exercise, right? You're lifting heavy shit, but it's not going to be near as much as you would be if you were just squatting your regular weight, the regular weight that you would be squatting. And so you need to give yourself time to improve, like time for that number, that base squat number, whatever it is for you, you know, to improve, to go up by 10, 15, 20, 25 pounds, right? Over the course of this 4 to 6 week period. And then when you've completed that cycle and you've peaked in that cycle, then you can kind of relax it a little bit and move on to something else. And that'll give your whole system in those areas time to recover. And it'll also be able to use some of the abilities that you developed in that cycle to improve yourself in these other areas, right? So we started with strength. Our first mesocycle over the course of a first 4 to 6 week period is our strength cycle. And that's where we're doing our heaviest lifts. And then we move on to our second mesocycle, right? Which is going to be more focused on power, let's say, right? And so within this within this cycle, we're going to do iterations of these lifts that we were doing before, but maybe focus them in a way that we weren't. So develop our speed strength to be able to recruit all of the hypertrophy and just the muscle activation that we've been training all this time, being able to recruit it faster. So instead of trying to develop more, trying to make it stronger, trying to make our muscles bigger, we try and take what we have and we will try and use it more efficiently, right? And more economically, right? And so that's a training cycle there, right? And we're going to go into the specific exercises that I'm going to advocate for each of these various cycles. And again, what I'm really giving you now is sort of the way that I'm approaching this now in my life, that there is no hard and fast rule, except that what I want you to take away from this is this idea that I'm going to do this type of training in a way that I've planned, right? That I've put some thought into, that makes sense, that is going to that gives me milestones to achieve and gives me time to rest and recuperate, and time to sort of develop myself. Because again, the validation is the motivation, right? So one other thing I want to say about microcycles is, am I going to do squats one day and then squats the next day? I think everyone here probably knows that's a terrible idea, right? So we need, you know.
Do you want to fall down the stairs?
Right,
That's
right.
how you
It's
fall
just,
down
yeah,
the stairs.
it's so bad to not give your body time to recover. And honestly, you know, if you're not putting too much stress on yourself, you probably could do it, but you're not going to get the gains that you would have otherwise, right? Because the gains come from the recovery. The gains, and this is basically true in all of physical fitness, so far as I can tell, is that the gains come from the recovery. They don't come, you know, the process of breaking down is instrumental, right? Like you can't have recovery if you don't have the initial damage to recover from. But the part of the process where you're actually making the improvements is in the rest periods, right? And the time that you're taking to recover from the exercise.
Yep. So sorry, just fun fact. So when you're lifting, you're actually tearing, like there's little tiny tears that happen in your muscle fibers. So that initial swelling you see is actually fluid retention as your body's like, oh shit, we're damaging our muscles, let's go fix it. So that rest and recovery is actually rest, recovery, and repair as your muscles are reforming and building additional fibers to support the trauma that you just kind of introduced by lifting heavy shit.
Right.
So inside scoop.
Yeah. Right. Great. So so in terms of our microcycles, you know, what's important is that you do it in a way that is going to give the muscle groups that you're working time to recover, right? And so for me, you know, and what that means to you might be different. So if you're the kind of person who can work out every day and who wants to work out every day, then you're probably not benefiting a ton from what I'm saying here, because you probably already know this. But you might want to do something like an upper lower body, you know, upper lower split, where you're doing on Monday you do an upper body thing, and on Tuesday you do a lower body thing, and then on Wednesday you're back to upper body. That's giving yourself a day to recover in between. For me, I don't have that kind of time. I can't train 5 days a week. And so I tend to stick with programs that are more total body splits. And so that's going to be, for me, that's going to be like train 3 days a week, and when I'm in the gym, go heavy on compound exercises, and try and make my volume as high as I can keep it, within the framework of my cycle. But so I go Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and then I might do squats on Monday, and then bench on Wednesday, and then deadlift on Friday. And that sort of gives me time in between my squat and my deadlift to, it gives me 4 days in between my squat and my deadlift to recover. Because because also the other thing that I want to talk about is, when you're picking your exercises, you really ought to know what muscles you're working out, right? So write that down. Know what muscles you're working out, right? Don't pick exercises that you're unsure of, because the fact is, you need the time, you need the recovery time, and you need to be able to program your time in such a way that you give those muscle groups rest. So if you think, well, no, I did deadlift on Monday, so I can't do deadlift again on Wednesday, so I'll sumo deadlift, right? Or I'll, lunge or whatever, or, do heavy lunges or heavy squats. And it's like, well, you kind of already worked out your posterior chain. You might want to think about taking, now, certainly not the day after, we'll say. You might get away with doing deadlifts one day and then lunges 2 days later. But like, don't do squats on Monday and deadlifts on Tuesday and think you're giving yourself time to recover because you're doing 2 different exercises. You're not. You need to know what muscle groups you're working out in your lifts, and give those muscle groups the time to recover, as opposed to looking at it as like, well, I need time to recover from exercise A, so I'll do exercise B, and then I go back to exercise A again later. Right? That's a bad way to look at it. What we should really do is we should think about each of the exercises is really just a sort of grouping of the muscle groups that we're working out, and then that'll also help us program our micro cycles, right? Our days, sets, and reps of the particular exercise we're doing, so that there's some sort of synergy there, right? So we don't just do a hodgepodge of various exercises. We say, okay, today's posterior chain day, tomorrow's or we might do a push-pull split or whatever, right? And that's going to be up to you guys. You can look online for various ways of doing that. The important thing for me to impart to you is be systematic about it and be careful when you're doing it, and understand that when you train, you're training muscle groups, that you're breaking them down. You need to give them time to recover, and you need to know what muscle groups you're breaking down so that you can give the appropriate time to recover to what. Okay, so we talked about that. We talked about the various cycles, and then you figure the macro cycle is going to be the combination of all of these various mesocycles, right? So the way that I've broken down my mesocycles is I'm looking at, a 4 to 6 week period of, say, strength development, right? And then another 4 to 6 week period of power development, right? Or maybe a 4 week period of power development. And then I might alternate back and forth between those. So when I'm in strength mode, my goal is to do the heavy compound lifts and go as big as I can, use the heaviest weights that I can. And then within the next 4 to 6 week cycle, I might switch. So now instead of doing deadlifts, I'm doing power cleans and hang cleans, right? And so write those down. Those are really important exercises for you guys to do. Power cleans and hang cleans. And really what that is it's a deadlift that you lift up into a front squat position, right? So you get up onto your shoulders and you come down to a 3/4 to a full squat in your cleans. I try and go down to a 3/4 most times. Sometimes I get excited and do a full clean. But so now I'm moving away from moving the heaviest weight that I can, and that within my next 4 to 6 week cycle, I'm now looking at moving bigger weight, but not necessarily as big as I can, but as explosively and as powerfully as I can, right? And so I'm going to have a very particular mesocycle programmed for that 4 to 6 week period. But I'm going to use all of the sort of all of the basic framework that I applied to my strength cycle. I'm going to apply it again to my power cycle. And so I'm paying attention to what muscle groups am I working, what type of recovery am I getting, and I'm going to try and carefully look at how the volume and intensity piece of the puzzle works differently when I'm training for power, right? Because it does, right? And I'm not going to go into the specifics here, but again, the focus should be on being careful with what you do and trying to do it in a way that makes sense. And so that's going to require effort on your part. But I only have so much time, so I'm only on the first page here. Okay, so now we're going to get to the types of exercises that we're going to be doing. So now at this point we are in fencing mode. Okay, so up until now we've just basically been talking general strength and fitness training principles that apply, foundational principles that apply to every sport or any athletic sort of development, or even just general physical fitness, right? But now we need to think about, how does the fact that we're doing this for fencing play a role? Okay, some of the things that I'm going to say is that when we already talked about, we want to know what muscle groups we're using in an exercise, right? So when I squat, I know all of the various components of a squat. I know that I'm working my quads. I know that I'm working my core. I know that in a deadlift, I'm working my glutes and my hamstrings more so than in a squat. I know these things, right? But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, as fencers, what are the areas that we ought to be developing, right? So what are the muscle groups, and so it's not just the muscle groups, but the muscle groups and the movement patterns, right, that we're going to use in our fencing, right? So that's really important for me, that when we think about, like, let's say I want to do lunges, right? So you might say, I want to do lunges because I lunge when I fence, right? I think that's a really valuable perspective, right? Right there, that you're lunging, you know that you need to train that. I think we all agree that you're going to get better at lunges by doing lunges. Then you might say, well, I want to do weighted lunges, right? Well, weighted lunges are good. Weighted lunges are good because they strengthen that part of our body, but do they make us lunge better, right? So if we're looking for improvement in our lunge, right, it does make us lunge a little bit better, but it's not the optimal way of improving our lunge, because if what we're looking for from our lunge is explosive power going forward, right, then we're loading the weight incorrectly for our resistance, right? It's resistance training. So what we're trying to do in a lunge is push our body forward, and what we're doing is we're doing it under load. But where should the load, and I'll open this up to the critical thinkers in here, where should the load be if I want to improve the power at which I propel myself forward? Where should the resistance be coming from?
Behind you?
Yeah, who said that?
Liz.
Liz, yeah, Liz, exactly, behind you. Behind you. And so when you're doing like weighted lunges because you got a barbell on your back, right? Then where is the resistance pulling? Downward, right? So it's training something completely different, and it's not training something that's optimized for propelling yourself forward, right? So that's just one example of like a gajillion examples that I could come up with that sort of like take something that seems to be intuitive about physical training and connecting it to the physical exercise that the activity that we're trying to improve ourselves in. So in this case, fencing, right? Something that seems intuitive. Oh yeah, if I just carry around a 50-pound Bulgarian bag, which everyone should get a Bulgarian bag, by the way. I love it. It's my favorite tool. But if I carry around a 50-pound Bulgarian bag and I do weighted lunges, then that's gonna improve like dramatically. And the truth is, it will make you stronger, but it's not going to be as effective as maybe something like a banded lunge or a lunge that, you know, you've got a harness on and you've connected to a bunch of plates behind you. And then as you jump forward, the plate's being pulled from behind you, or the bands are being stretched, or whatever the case may be. Does that make sense? Is everyone following there?
Mm-hmm.
So I want to really think about that. That when we know what kind of exercise, what kind of movement patterns we're trying to simulate, that's going to help us decide what kind of exercises do that best. The other thing that goes along with that goes in tandem with that, is knowing what types of movement patterns our muscles are meant to do, right? So like that's so important to understand the way that the muscles work, the kind of exercise that we're doing. So for instance, right, if I do, you know, if my goal is to get a full chest contraction, I'm not going to take my shirt off or anything, but I'm just going to show you. So this is my chest, right? And so like the muscle begins here, right? And so if I want to do a full chest contraction, you know, am I going to get a full chest contraction that way? Not a full one, right? Because the muscle, the fibers of the muscle go across my chest like this, right? So if I want to get a full chest contraction, I'm actually going to get it from this movement pattern, right? Not from this movement pattern, right? This is going to be powered by some other, you know, by your shoulder, and you can feel. So one of the rules of thumb, you can write this down too. If you're wondering what muscles are engaged by a particular exercise, do the movement pattern. Do the movement pattern and feel on your body what tightens and what tightens how much. Does that make sense? So like, don't be afraid to experience it yourself, because you might realize like this is a front delt heavy movement pattern, right? And it's not a chest heavy movement pattern, right? And then if I want to enhance my chest, right, the strength of my chest or whatever. Oh, nice, good. Someone put the link to a Bulgarian bag in the. Then maybe I need to cross the center line of my body with my movement pattern in order to engage that. And then if everyone do that right now, like you can feel the full chest contraction, right? If you go across there, and then versus this, and you can feel the front delt contraction, or like going right in front of you like this, you can feel right there the front delt contraction, right? So, and you can feel that it engages the chest a little bit, right? So this forward punch engages the chest a little bit, but not as much as it does here. Whereas, you know, it engages the front shoulder a lot. So that's just one example of like, how do our muscles work? We ought to be thinking critically about how our muscles work. Write that down if you have. And B, what muscle and what type of engagement of our muscles work when we're fencing, right? So that's really, really important, that we need to know. You know, it's not good enough for someone to say, oh, well, you know, lunging makes you better at fencing because you lunge when you fence, right? You need to know what's happening in a lunge, right? Where is the weight, right? Where's the weight on your foot when you're doing a lunge, right? Or on your feet, rather. The weight should be, if you're doing a lunge, the weight should be on the rear foot, right? So not knowing that, not understanding, and the reason that it's going to be on the rear foot is why? Because it's the rear quad. It's the extension of the rear quad and hamstring and glute muscles that propel you forward, right? So knowing that will help you, you know, that will help you going forward when you're programming your lunges, not to do them in a way that doesn't simulate the type of activity that you're training to become better at, right? So that would be my next sort of caveat, is that whenever we're programming these exercises, it's so important that we have a systematic approach to how we develop our training program that involves systematic variation. That B, we program in them in such a way that gives us time to make improvements, and then cycle them in such a way that we can build off of the improvements that we make, right? And then finally, the types of exercises we do should be relevant to what we're training for, right? So that's sort of the beginning of my my lecture. I hope you guys have some time. Now we're gonna get into the meat and potatoes of what we're doing here. Anyone have any questions or any insights to add to that?
So your macro, are you treating that like the fitness goal
Yeah.
that you're working on for that time period?
Yeah. So for me, I tend to break things up. I stick with this idea of 4 to 6 week cycle. I tend to break things up in that way, and then sort of like, as you know, I have 3 cycles. I do a strength, and then power, and then a more of a power conditioning sort of cycle at the end, to sort of, and we're going to go into that when it comes to training camp. So because we are going to talk about training camps today. But then, like, the idea is, okay, once I've made all of the gains that I can reasonably expect to make in this area, I move to this next area. And then once I make all the gains, then I move to this next area. And then by the time I get here, I'm ready to start making gains back here again, right? So that's sort of that's the way that I look at the macro. But a lot of people just put an arbitrary date on it, right? So they say their macro cycle is like, okay, I'm going to give myself a year, right? So like, what am I going to accomplish in a year, right? And like, my goal is to be the best power lifter I can, and I'm going to put an end cap on it by January, by December 31st of 2021. I've achieved that. Like, this is what I can look back and say, this is my, I've achieved my goal. This is what I've accomplished, right? But for me, because as a martial artist, I'm constantly engaged in the self-improvement process, right? And so for me, the macro cycles are a little smaller because I don't have an end. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have an end goal. I don't have like this sort of like, I put an end date on what I'm trying to achieve. Like, for me, I'm always just trying to make my body better to be a better fencer, right?
Right.
Did that help answer that question?
Yep.
Any other questions?
How do you avoid muscle burnout? So like, if you're focusing on general strength, right, and you're doing a full body workout 3 times a week, how do you ensure, and Ellie, you've kind of got me thinking about this quite a bit with the yoga focus, where you kind of, I guess it's easy to work the same muscle group over and over and over again and cause wear and tear, even with exercise diversity, I guess. So how do you keep an eye on or avoid that?
Well, yeah. So that's a good point. So, like, a lot of what I'm saying, a lot of what I said in the first half of this, right, was geared towards sort of an implicit recognition of that fact, right, which is that, like, we have to be careful of what we're doing, because once our body says, okay, no, we can, or like when I've hurt myself so many times in the gym, and there's nothing worse than feeling great, right? Feeling great about what you're doing and where you're headed and the improvements that you're making. And then you do something stupid and you tweak a muscle, or God forbid you tear a muscle, right? And it's like, God, you're on fire, you're on a roll. But beyond, so it's so important to keep an eye on those things. And part of what we do is we try and create programs that are, that cater to that, right? That recognize that fact and are gentle to our bodies, or at least as gentle as it can be, given what we're trying to do. But then on the other hand, you always have to listen to your body, right? And so something that you, that's a really great point in the fact that you might start a cycle, a mesocycle, right? And you say, okay, I'm on the strength program, and you start going, and you realize that your body just isn't have it anymore, right? You've been working too hard, or for whatever reason, or the stress of your life, or anxiety, or whatever, and you can't do it. And you've got to be able to say, okay, I had a plan. It's time to go back to the drawing board and come up with a different plan, right? And maybe that different plan might require like a week and a half to 2 weeks of rest, of like strict rest with like recovery cardio or whatever, right? So I think, I think that's really, it's an important insight that, beyond trying to diversify your training regimen and beyond trying to program the muscle groups that you work in a way that allows them time to recover, that you always have to be very careful and cognizant of what is your body telling you. My body's saying, no, we're done. I need to quit, because if you don't quit, you're going to hurt me, and that's really important that we're paying attention to that. Any other questions? All right.
Similar vein. I have one.
Yeah, go for it.
Similar vein. So with this training regimen construction, right, we now have to look at properly nourishing and supplementing our bodies to accommodate this extra work we're going to be making it do.
Yeah.
And if you touch on that later, feel free to just
Well,
go.
so actually, that was my next topic, but I skipped it because I ran over on this on time here. But I will tip my hat to it real quick. You have to eat right. So what does eating right mean? I'm going to give you my shorthand for eating right. There's a lot of reasons that I have arrived at this conclusion. And if you catch me at the bar or whatever after fencing, then I'll tell you all about it. But all I'm going to say is I basically cut bread out of my diet. I cut starchy veg out of my diet. So it's potatoes, rice, things of that nature, right? So I don't do any grains.
Sugars, your simple carbs.
I don't do any simple sugars or simple carbs. All I do for carbs is fibrous carbs. And when I say, like, these are general guidelines, right? They're not, I did have a slice of bread today. But I went like the last 2 years up until this week, not eating any bread. And then like this week I was like, I'm doing bread, screw it. But the bottom line is I don't do any bread or simple carbs. I do fibrous carbs. I do a mountain of fruits and vegetables, and I do a lot of protein. You need the protein. Your body needs the protein to build the muscles, right? That's what it makes your muscles out of, right? So if you're looking for hypertrophy, certainly, but even if you're not, you are destroying your muscles every time you use them. And so you need the protein to build them. If you're going to increase strength or you want to increase size, you need to have the protein in your diet. But also you need the carbs to be able to process the protein, right? So the carbs are the fuel that your body uses to take the protein and turn it into muscle, right? And the fats too, and all of these serve different functions beyond what I'm saying. But it's really, really important that you consume enough calories to do it, right? So everything that we're saying here is tied to the amount of calories that you consume and the types of calories that you consume, right? But even still, yeah, gains need food, like Elena. Elena, is that right?
I go by Ellie. It's fine. Don't worry about it.
Ellie is great. Gains need food. So we need to feed our bodies. We need to make sure that we're able to do the exercise. And a lot of times you'll be able to tell. Like, I've definitely been in the gym and said, I need to stop. I didn't eat enough for this workout, and then or maybe not in the gym. Maybe you went to the gym and you didn't eat enough after, right? Because your body consumed everything you had and then you just never replenished it. So you're not getting the right kind of recovery. You need to eat right for your recovery. You need to eat right for your workouts. You need to eat right before your workouts so that your body's able. You just need to eat right. That's what it boils down to. If you want to be an athlete, you got to eat right. Most of the time, that's going to involve not eating the good stuff, which is trash processed foods and bread, right? Which is the way that we get down in America. Now, I eat a lot of meat. I eat a lot of red meat. From what I hear, that's bad for me. It's that it comes with, well, I mean, that's the truth, right? So red meat is bad for you. But it does come with really, really great performance gains in the short term. So, like, I'm a better athlete right now than I would be if I wasn't eating as much red meat as I do. But also, I'm probably going to die sooner. But that's my choice, right? So you guys have to figure that out for yourselves. So far as I know, you can be you can be an athlete and be a vegan. But,
Absolutely. You just have to get crafty with the type of protein and the protein diversity. And a lot of that has to do with the essential and non-essential amino acids.
so, I mean, I think we could.
And I'm like totally blanking on like what those are, but.
Well, but that's the thing, right? Is that the general theme of this whole discussion isn't like, I'm going to give you all the details right now, right? The general theme is like, everything I'm saying is something that you're going to have to, that you're going to have to figure this stuff out, and you're going to have to spend some time with it in order to get your head around it. I can tell you what I do, and I can tell you why I do it, but at the end of the day, you know, it's engagement with this activity. All right, so we've got that. Now let's talk about the areas of improvement. We've already talked about strength, and we're going to go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to ask, is there any peripherals that you have to suggest? Like when I lifted when I was younger, I always was sore and always was beaten up. And then I found, aside from like, the super bulk protein stuff, and I'm not talking about like go to GNC and buy like protein, but like I found that powdered magnesium supplements and inositol as a supplement helped me a lot with my recovery, because my body never really recovered well. Right. So is there any suggestions you have on like peripheral, not ridiculous protein mass gains?
Yes, there is. And I actually hinted at it already. So when I say I eat a mountain of fruits and vegetables before I eat anything else, I really mean that. Like I eat a mountain of fruits and vegetables, fibrous fruits and vegetables. So every day in my omelet, we'll say, I have about 6 whole pieces of vegetables, or six whole vegetables. I have an entire onion, an entire pepper. I have, some huge handful of mushrooms, a huge handful of spinach, kale, bok choy, whatever it is. Like I really, really mean that you need to eat a lot of fibrous vegetables. And the reason is because of all the micronutrients that's contained within those. Like it's not just the calories. We like to think about the calories. We like to think, okay, I need enough carbs to process the protein, and I need enough protein to build the muscle. I need enough fats to kind of grease the grooves and make it all really work. But for me, like those vegetables, it's the micronutrients in the fruits and veg, right? So, and I also eat like 6 to 7 pieces of fruit a day, right? So I'll have, a handful of blackberries, strawberries, raspberries, and blueberries every day. And not just one handful of all of them, like a handful of each of them. And then a mango, a handful of pineapple, a pear, orange, a banana every day, right? So like and especially when I'm in this mode, I'm in Thanksgiving mode right now. So I'm like literally lying to you, and I kind of feel a little bit bad about it, but I actually do maintain this diet for most of my life. So, but like I do this every day. And another thing about nutrition, is the last thing I'm going to say about nutrition, is the best way to figure out what you should eat is figure out what you can eat. And by that, I mean what you can eat that fits the bill, right? That meets all the requirements that I'm suggesting, and that you want to eat every day, right? Like that's the trick, is you got to find something that works for you, that you will enjoy eating every day over and over again for however long that you're keeping this up, right? So for me, that's an omelet, that's a bowl of cottage cheese and fruit. Sometimes I'll cheat and allow myself some oatmeal, if it's whole oatmeal, and I'll just season it with berries, right? So no sugar, no milk, or if milk, skim milk, and that's it. And then for dinner, I have roasted vegetables, like a mountain of roasted vegetables. So we're talking zucchini, carrots, onions, peppers, asparagus, or whatever. Like that's every day. And then either a steak. I eat a steak every day. I eat a pound of steak every day. That's just me. You shouldn't do that. You really shouldn't do that. I gave up booze 2 years ago, and so I just went to steak. Sorry, go ahead, Marlene. Marlene, did you have something? You look.
Yeah, I don't know. And I'm sure we're gonna get mixed feedback on the whole dietary thing anyways. And the thing that makes nutrition so dense and hard to digest is everybody's body is different and requires slightly different variations of the core nutrients, right? Your fats, proteins, sugars, to function and do what it needs to do. That being said, when he's saying to experiment and find foods that A, you like, B, that fit the bill,
you got to know what bill, right.
Like the first thing you try might not work. Like some people do really well on keto and others get super sick. Some people do really well going full vegan. Some people get really sick. There's variations you can do, and I also wouldn't fully demonize red meat. It's bloody, and the blood is the thing that helps us. Like it's heme, it's bioavailable heme. The iron, especially, like people will say there's, you know, a buttload of iron in spinach, and there is, but it's not as bioavailable. And when you say bioavailable, it's how easily your body can access that nutrient and then apply it to its systems and functions.
Right. That's a good point. That a lot of times what we know about the nutrition information from some food at the grocery store is what is contained within it, right? But we tend to kind of not think about as carefully how much of that our body can actually process and access, right? So like, it's not always true that just because there's a ton of some nutrient, micronutrient in a thing, that our body can process any of it at all, because of the way that the chemical construction of that vegetable or whatever it is. So so I guess I want to just reiterate, we stick with nutrition. The general rules are you need to have enough calories to power your workouts. And and I would argue that you need to have enough variety of nutrients. And one way that you can get that is by, eating a ton of, and so the thing about the eating a ton of, right, is that the fibrous vegetables that I eat are extremely low calorie. And so in order for me to get the calorie requirements to fuel my workouts, I have to eat so much of the various fruits and veg that I'm getting all of these vitamins and minerals from just the massive quantity of these things I'm getting. And that's just me trying to meet my caloric needs, right?
Yep.
So that's been my shorthand.
Are you 2,500 to 3,000? What's your caloric intake?
I'm probably 3,500 when I'm not training hard, and when I'm training hard, I'm probably 4,500. So I mean, it's a lot, but that's also going to be different for everybody. You just have to experiment and do the workouts. Your body will tell you if you haven't eaten enough.
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, and some of the things when I was doing the research, because I was eating a fair amount of protein and not enough vegetables, but I found that, like, there's also like a weird thing with supplements where if your body doesn't have enough supplement of the thing in it, it doesn't recover. So for some reason, my body just does not have enough magnesium in it. And I need to take a magnesium supplement.
Yeah.
And if I don't take a magnesium supplement, my muscles freeze up and they don't keep any amount of like flexibility. So I'll get really big and really bulky, but I'll be really tight. And until I started taking magnesium, I would have cramps in my hamstrings.
Yeah.
So like I found that, like, even on top of eating food, sometimes finding like the supplement that heals your body works really well. And the inositol is interesting because it's a substance. It's in red meat. There's actually a lot of inositol in red meat. And it's basically a substance that's inorganic, organic. It's it's like both organic and inorganic, but it basically, every cell in your body uses it to heal. And you'll find it in some like workout proteins, but you can take it by itself also.
Sure. I mean, so I would guess, we do need to move on, because I was actually hoping to skip nutrition, but it's good. We need to know about this. We need to be able to talk about this. What I would say is there's lots of things like that, and everyone's body's different. To really harp on that, the more you try, the better you're going to see how your body responds. I think in general, when you avoid like the stuff like the simple carbs, you're avoiding the stuff that doesn't come with a ton of nutrients, especially like the bread, the processed foods, because what they do with the processed foods is they take all the good stuff out of it, right? So in the processing of it, they like they take the part that's the thing that we like the most, but they remove all the stuff that's actually good for us. And then they just take that in massive quantities and they make our bread out of it or whatever, right? So like, you know, avoid the processed foods. For me, I avoid processed foods, I avoid whole foods, and I stick with whole foods, and I avoid the starchy, sugary carbs, and I stick with fibrous fruits and vegetables. Gets me a lot of fiber, gets me a lot of micronutrients, and it allows me to eat the massive quantities of red meat that I eat. So also that's a good thing. Okay, so now saving this, processed bad, sugar bad, good. Okay, so now let's move on to the areas that we want to improve, and I'm gonna go through these pretty quick because we're running lower on time, but so we talked about what kind of exercises do we want to do. We want to do things that are relevant to what we're doing, right? And I'm going to go through a list of ways that I found work for me in those areas. And then as far as getting to the training camp thing, we can see how much time we have left. But we'll start with aerobic conditioning. So aerobic conditioning is interesting. We talked about this last time. How much do we need really, really high level aerobic conditioning for fencing? If we're thinking about training for competition, how important is it? You say it ranks highly or not as highly? Anybody?
I'd say it's up there, but I don't think it's the key thing. Like aerobic to me is more important for ring-in, I guess, something where you're constantly engaged, constantly using. Whereas fencing, you have a break in between each bout, right?
Yeah,
So you have a moment to catch your breath.
I would agree with that, right? So it's the nature of the combat sport, right? That when we're fencing, that we you know, we have that break in between each, especially if we're in competition. Like when we're just fencing with each other, maybe the break is 5 seconds, right? Enough time to start the next pass or whatever. But if we're fencing at a tournament, it's not requiring a ton from us. Like, yeah, who wrote rapid recovery between high intensity rounds?
Eric.
Was it Eric?
Mm-hmm. Eric,
yeah.
Yeah,
yeah, good answer, Eric. That's exactly right. Right. So, but does that mean that we should dismiss like aerobic training? Definitely not, right? We need aerobic training for being able to train over long periods of time, right? So that's going to help us just in terms of the output during our fencing training, right? So if we figure the higher that we're able to operate during the length of the fencing training. So let's say what's your normal fencing training time, like your normal schedule? How long do you go? An hour and a half?
What? Oh, like class time?
Yeah.
Yeah, hour and a half.
Yeah,
and
hour and
well,
a half, right?
Class time's like officially an hour and a half, but everybody usually sticks around for a half hour, 45 minutes, where we just free fence.
Right. So, so if you figure like over the course of those 2 hours, you're gonna want to be as someone texted me. You're gonna want to be as engaged. Hold on a second. Someone's gonna join. You're gonna want to be as engaged as you can the entire time, right? Because the more energy you have at, let's say, the last 15 minutes of class, the more energy you're going to be able to put into doing those last drills, those final reps, whatever, and that's going to improve your fencing. So you do need good cardiovascular strength and endurance, and it's just not like exactly a one-for-one corollary to what we're engaging in when we're doing this martial art, right? So one way that, hey Bob, one way that I would look at training your aerobic fitness is at least 2 times a week, 3 times a week, right? So hopefully all of you guys are doing that anyway, because that's, I think, like the recommended guidelines for just being a human is doing. So everyone runs their 20. I'm looking at nods of approval from everybody right now. So yeah, so for me, I try and run. Running is the best one. Like running is I go ahead. Oh yeah, it also sucks the most, right? But you know, one thing that you could try is a bike, right? So go to the gym. When I use gym memberships, I have weights in my garage I can lift with. But when I'm using gym memberships, I mostly use them for the machines because I don't want to run. And using the bike, doing 30 minutes on a bike is a lot easier to do 30 minutes outside running. And if you do that 3 times a week over the course of some 3 weeks, well, all of a sudden you're prepared to begin running, right? So don't be afraid to use some of the other, but the idea here is 2 to 3 times a week of steady state cardio, right? So write that down. That's just a general thing, but 2 to 3 times a week of steady state cardio. And by steady state, I mean suboptimal output for 25 to 35 minutes. And that's just to keep yourself, that's just to keep your heart happy. But it's going to improve, like it's going to improve your aerobic capacity, right? So it's going to improve the amount of time as you are, you know, exercising that. It's going to improve the amount of time that you're able to sustain that suboptimal output, right? So maybe you begin with 20 minutes because you can't do 30. And then maybe you get up to 30. And then maybe all of a sudden before you know it, they turn into 45-hour-long steady state cardio sessions, right? And that's just going to have a really, really positive benefit on all of the areas in terms of training. It's not going to have a one-for-one corollary benefit in terms of performance in fencing competition, but it's going to have all of these indirect benefits through improved performance in drilling and training over the course of the hour-and-a-half-long class period, to more energy to engage in the other things that are going to be on this list, right? So everyone kind of sees how that works, right? Great. Swimming is great too. Buy a salt bike. So if you're going to do the bike, you know, one way that you can do the bike is this guy, right? Like or you could do this guy, right? Both of them are great. I don't really like the elliptical. I like using it because I'm lazy, and I like to do, when I'm lazy, I like to do things that are not hard. But as someone who's interested in sharing what I've learned, I think I've learned that it's probably not the best thing in the world. You could be doing something. You could be doing something that is requiring more engagement for you. But I would say the most important thing is that always try and up the intensity, right? So sustain superior performance, right? Your progressive superior performance, right? So you don't want to just, if let's say you're doing 15 minutes and then that 15 minutes turns into a half an hour, then that half an hour turns into 45 minutes. And then you're like, well, I don't have time to do an hour. Okay, well, up the intensity, right? There's a button on the bike that you can press, and then now it's a 12 or a 13 or whatever. And now you're back down to 15 minutes, right? And continue progressing so that you can improve your both your output and also your capacity, right? So when we talk about capacity, that's the amount of reserves that you have, right? So like what and then when we talk about output, that's like the intensity that you're able to perform. So like that's like your power exercise or whatever, right? Okay, now let's talk about rapid recovery between high intensity rounds, right? As Eric pointed out, which is brilliant, right? So what are some of the ways that we can do that? We talked about this last time. What's a fencing exchange look like? Someone who's not Marlene or Eric or any of my guys. Not everybody all at once. I'm going to pick on you. What about you, Joe?
When you say look like, it's a bunch of bursts of action.
It is a bunch.
It's very high. It's spiky, right? You spike up.
Yeah, very spiky. Yeah. If we were to look at like the waveform of a pass, right? So, and by pass I mean from the moment that the two fencers are agreed that they're in the bout to the touch, to whatever touch we're going to count as the touch, right? So like, if we look at the waveform of that, it's going to be very quiet, super intense, quiet, super intense. And then, you know, if it even gets that far, it probably stopped. If it's competition, it probably stopped after one of the first high intensity bursts, right? But that's what we got. We've got very, very quiet, a very, very quiet waveform that's not requiring a tremendous amount of aerobic fitness, right? But can be, right? So at the higher levels, when people are really playing with the time and distance stuff, they're really keeping their energy up. And so that's closer to that steady state stuff that we were talking about before with aerobic conditioning, aerobic capacity. But really where the action is in that recovery. So how can we simulate that? For me, the way that I look at my alactic power output and recovery is I think of a PEL as optimal for that, right? So one way that you might do your PEL work is you might go 10 seconds on, and by 10 seconds I mean rapid combinations of cuts, right? You know, it could be a Zverkopter sort of short edge, long edge thing, or it could be, you know, just various long edge cuts, Unters, Meyer square, whatever you want to do. But the important thing is that you're really, really going all out in that activity, right? So it's not just, you know, cut. It's exhausting yourself with less focus on optimizing the mechanical part of the activity, right? So like you're allowing yourself to fall off a little bit mechanically, because the idea is you want to exhaust yourself, right? You want to exhaust yourself in these 10-second bursts, because what you're doing is you're training your ability to A, perform in those 10-second bursts, and B, recover from those 10-second bursts, right? So if your entire focus is on keeping everything right, then you may not be able to put yourself in the state of alactic output, right? So like the anaerobic state that you need to recover from, right? And so if you're never getting into the anaerobic state, you can never recover from it, and so you're never training your body to do a better job of that, right? But beyond just the PEL, and I'm always going to defer to exercises that simulate the type of activity that we're doing here. And so PEL work is some of the best, because that's as close to swinging a sword as you can get, because it's actually swinging a sword. But that being
shuttle
said,
runs are good too.
What's that?
Shuttle runs. You can do shuttle runs to, like, you're rushing to take center in a ring or whatever. Like, you shuttle run into center, you do your cut combination, you shuttle run out.
Yeah. So yeah, good. So are you allowing yourself the recovery time, right? So maybe after you shuttle run out, you spend the 20 seconds or whatever doing your doing your shadow fencing or your passive recovery, or however it is that you're covering, and then do it again. But yeah, totally. That's a good one. Other things that come to mind, battle ropes. I love battle ropes. Battle ropes is a total body exercise, a lot of power output there, right? Especially like the heavy ones. You have to be moving them powerfully, or else they're not going to move for you. And so battle ropes for 10 seconds, 20 seconds off kind of thing. And then again, the assault bike. So I love the assault bike is this bike, right? So you've got the two different bikes that I talked about. You got this one, and then you've got this one. This one at high intensity will kick your ass, and I'm a big fan of that. And anything that's going to use like your whole body, right? So this is the type of stuff that we're doing with a sword, right? So, and moving our legs is the type of thing that we're trying to train for. That's the appropriate type of exercise. All right. So we've talked about doing it in a hit style and a sort of Tabata 10 seconds on, 20 seconds off style. But there's another, so if we're training recovery, we might want to lengthen the recovery time. So we might go like a 30-second, we might do a 30-second sort of exercise. Could be a plyo, right? Just could be 180 jump squats is a great one that I like to do for this. So if I'm training my anaerobic recovery, do 180 jump squats or just weighted jump squats or whatever. Everyone know what a 180 jump squat is? You're facing one direction, you jump up in the air, you're facing the other direction, you go down to a squat, and then from that you go back and forth. right? Do that for 30 seconds. That will kick your ass. I don't care who you are. Jumping is one of those cool plyo things that no matter who you are, no matter how strong you are, it will always kick your ass because you can always exert as much energy as you have, right? So that's what's cool about jumping. So doing those jump squats back and forth, and then take a 3-minute rest, right? And that's going to help train the recovery part more so than the output part, right? But also within that 3 minutes, we should never just be sitting there, right? So we should be doing passive recovery, because remember what Joe said about that waveform, right? You have these sort of spikes, but in between the spikes, there's activity, right? I mean, after one of the spikes, eventually the people go back to the corners and then there's no activity. But in, let's say, some of the free fencing that we do, you're still moving. Even though it's not a high intensity burst, you still need that active recovery, right? You need to recover from that high intensity burst in a way that doesn't allow you to just sit down and wait or stand there and wait, as it often goes, right, in tournaments, right? So paying attention to both of those, right? Another thing that I like to do is tempo runs, or I'm not even going to call them tempo runs, because tempo runs often means aerobic conditioning too. So we're going to so just like sprint, sprint out for like however many seconds and then walk back. And you can do that with hill sprints too. Hill sprints is a great exercise to do when you're training to like really exhaust yourself, because you will run out of breath very quickly, like after about 25 yards going uphill, right? Right? It sucks. Sprinting uphill as fast as you can will exhaust you after about 25 yards. Or, I don't know, maybe you've got higher recovery than that. Or maybe you're just really able to push yourself in that alactic anaerobic state. Like my son is a track athlete. You may have seen his video. He was lifting 500 pounds off the floor yesterday. That was cool. But he's a track athlete, and his the secret to his success is that he can just push himself in that alactic anaerobic state, right? So whereas the rest of us might want to have strong recovery, right? He's just able to operate there, right? And so for him, his body works differently. What does that tell us? That tells us that we also need to pay attention to our bodies, right? None of this is going to be a foolproof method to getting you in shape. It's just a way that I've looked at sort of to get me prepared for. Okay, so now let's talk about. So we talked about strength already. Strength is really going to be the basis of our resistance training, right? So by strength, what we're talking about is increasing the number of pounds that we can lift to its highest level, right? So whatever that highest number can be, that's what strength training is about, right? And we've already talked about how we're going to perform our strength training and how we're going to program it over the course of our mesocycle that we're going to have it in. But I want to talk about some of the strength exercises that we're going to do during the cycle, right? What is the first exercise that I'm going to say? Not Marlene. What's like the most important exercise ever?
Push-ups?
Squats. Nice try, Justin. Eric put it out in chat. Yeah, it is. It's the squat. So the squat, we should all be doing squats. Everyone should be doing squats. I hate squats. There's nothing worse than squats. But yeah, we should all be doing squats. One of the ways that you can do is you can do split squats, right? Why would we do a split squat? What's beneficial about a split squat? Remember what our protocol is for these exercises, right? How do they represent, how they simulate the type of activity that we're engaged in, right? So what kind of stance do you use in a traditional squat? You use a perfectly square stance, right? Well, yeah. So, Elena, Ellie, is that right, Marlene?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
Ellie. So Ellie's talking about simulating fencing, right? So like when we stand in fencing, we don't ever stand square, right? We stand staggered, right? We stand in a split stance, right? So thinking about that going forward, that's going to affect the way that we think about squats and also deadlifts. And that's not to say that we shouldn't do our traditional back squat or front squat or whatever, and those square squats, but also we should be thinking about how can we get closer to that environment. So for me, the type of stance that I have a very wide stance, right? So in my fencing, I keep a very, very wide stance. My students will tell you that, right? So for me, the sumo squat is going to get me, is going to be the kind of thing that I'm going to program very heavily. Beyond the sumo squat, I also like the safety bar squat. That's it does different things to your body, and also it doesn't suck as bad as regular squats because it's got pads on the bar. So everyone should buy themselves a safety bar. They're really expensive. You can find them at the gym. Hopefully the gym that you go to has one, right? What other kinds of squats? The Zercher squat are good ones. A back and front squat, they're all going to target different muscles. And they're going to give you some of the variation in terms of volume and intensity, just in terms of the different types of muscle activation that the different squat exercises give you, right? So having the variety does more than just train your body in a more well-rounded way, but it also provides your body various stimuli that it's able to respond to in different ways that will increase the value of your training. So that's going to be your squats. Deadlift, right? I'm going to stick with the compound exercises with the strength training, right? Deadlift, and you can include, and I said sumo squat, sumo deadlift is what I meant, is what I meant there. Traditional deadlift, and then also, can you do a split stance deadlift? I got some lifters in here scratching their heads like, I don't think you can do a split stance deadlift. Oh.
Okay, I've done single leg deadlifts, but I don't know if that counts.
So it's not what I'm suggesting here, although that's variety, and so that we're going to count that among them. So what if we didn't use a traditional bar, right? What
Are
if
you
we
talking
use
farmer, like the farmer?
the hex bar or
the hex bar,
the trap bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can
thinking
get
farmer
into,
carry.
Yeah, right, but it's essentially that farmer carry grip, right? So if you're using a hex bar, then you can adjust your stance, and you can get something closer to the type of posture that you would find yourself in if you were fencing, right? And so just thinking about that variety again, right? Don't limit yourself to like what kind of bar, like, all right, so I'm using a traditional bar, so I need to do a traditional deadlift, right? No, there are ways that you can work around it, and there's specialty equipment that you can use. And if you're paying for a gym membership, hopefully you're paying to use that really Gucci equipment that they've gotten there, because none of us can afford it, right? And again, I talked about programming my strength, so I'm trying to avoid putting deadlift and squat back to back. So I'll probably do a bench day in the middle. This is for me during my strength cycle, right? And so we'll say Monday I'll do my deadlift, and then, or rather Monday I'll do my squat, and then Wednesday I'll do my bench. And so along with bench, so we have bench, which is going to be that compound chest exercise and shoulder exercise and various things. But also, right, we can modify our bench to maybe a JM press or a close grip bench, or you write those down. Do you JM press or close grip bench? And they're going to target different muscles. So for instance, the JM press is sort of a tricep. It's like a bench tricep exercise, right? And then and so that's gonna so on the bench day, another thing to think about is the back, right? And for back stuff, so we've done legs. When we're talking compound lifts, we're basically trying to cover as much muscles as we can. I'm not going to go into accessory lifts today. I'm giving you the biggest lifts because they're going to give you the biggest numbers, right? And so we've got bench, and the last thing that I'm going to suggest is pull-ups / chin-ups. Everyone should be doing them on a regular basis. They're so good for you, and they're really good for your back, and they're also really, really good for your core stability. Another thing about all of these lifts that we've talked about today are how good they are for your core stability, right? If you're going to carry some 300, 400 pounds on your back and your core, your abs and everything have to be strong because it has to support that weight. And so you're doing you're doing your body a favor by doing that. All right. Okay, so that's going to be kind of a basic framework for how we're going to approach our strength training. But then we're going to move out of strength into our power development, and then finally after that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're going to sort of combine the conditioning parts of what we talked about, right? And that's going to be aerobic and alactic stuff with the strength and power training parts of our exercises, and then also combine that with whatever we're doing for our fencing, right? And kind of try and come up with a reasonable plan for what we can do. All right, so power. So how am I going to generate power? So we already know the answer. Yeah, a solid core raise. You're lifting, but I'm sorry, I'm reading this chat like after the fact, but so we already know the answer because the medieval mind has already given us the answer, right? Stone throwing and leaping are how you generate power, and that remains true today. And I'm going to suggest a lot of exercises like that. But initially, when we're developing that, when we're in that cycle, we're in the the cycle directly that comes directly after the strength cycle, right? I want to look at the heavy power lifts, right? Or not the heavy power lifts necessarily, because power lifts are the main lifts. If the terminology got all janky, it's the Olympic lifts, right? The cleans, right? The either cleans, so hang cleans, power cleans in place of deadlift, weighted jump squats, right, in place of our squats, and then also we're going to add things like the landmine press. So everyone know what a landmine is? It's the bar that it's like a little socket that sits in the floor, and you can stick the barbell in it, and then you can sort of manipulate the barbell around like this, right? So there's going to be lots of things that you can do with all of that. So hang cleans and power cleans and landmine press is going to be where I'm focusing my attention. And here I'm looking for, at the highest weight that I can do, the explosive movement with, right? So I'm really going to put my whole body into pressing that landmine single arm press over my head, right? And then I'm going to do whatever weight that is. I might go to barbell rows instead of pull-ups here, and really pull the bar up into my chest as opposed to sort of a strength version of it. See how powerfully I can do that. And then again the weighted jump squats, right? So now I'm trying to shoot myself up off the ground with my squat. That means I'm not going to be able to use the weight that I was using before, right? If I'm squatting 400 pounds, I'm not going to be able to jump squat 400 pounds, right? Everyone should agree with that intuitively, right? Don't try it. Okay, so that's going to be where my focus is in that second cycle, and then at the end, at the very end of my macro cycle for me, and some people sort of kind of pair these together. They pair the sort of heavier power stuff with the lighter power stuff. And by lighter, what I mean is like a movement away from away from these heavy lifts, and a movement towards the most explosive movements that we can do. And that's going to be weighted box jumps. That's going to be med ball tosses, right? Med ball chest pass, or like a cross behind med ball slam, stuff that's going to generate the kind of core rotation that we would use in our fencing. Another one would be banded axe chops. So if you take your band and you kind of put the band up here, and then you come down with it this way, right? That simulates that motion of bringing the sword out in front of you. And you can do it in two ways, right? You can do it in the form of a cut, as though you were landing your hitter, right? Or you could do it in the form of a Zornhau that comes vertically down, so like this, right, as a taker, right? And so you can generate that motion. The other thing that I'm looking at in this stage is I'm looking at what we talked about before with the lunges and the various the various plyos, like reaction jumps and things that'll that I can do, sort of like propelling myself forward, where I have weights strapped behind me. I've got like a 45 or 2 plates, however many plates that I can put behind me and actually still propel myself forward in either a lunge or a jump or something like that, right? And so I'm going to do lots. It's going to be lots of jumping and lots of the med ball slam type stuff to get the core rotation activated as fast as I can, right? Because that's my goal by the end of my cycle, before I go back into my strength cycle, is to be able to fully utilize all of the strength that I have access to, right? So like what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to take my strength gains and turn them into power gains, right? And then once I'm there, then I go back and increase my strength again, right? If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's like teaching your body how to use the muscle it's gained, and then going back and building more, and then teaching it again.
Right. Exactly. Another thing, I'm sorry, in my second mesocycle, what I'll do is I'll in the end of the second and in the beginning of the third mesocycle, I'll also add isometrics, right? So now I'm doing other strength stuff, but instead of doing like the squat movement pattern with a bar weight and finishing the movement pattern, I might do it in a way that's static. So like hold it against the pins, right? That's like trying to lift a house. I don't know if you guys have ever done that before. It's really, really good for your body, right? So go to a house and try and lift it, right? You're not going to. That's sort of the trick. But what it does is it puts your body in this position, and then you're activating the muscles in that position, and it's overloading you that way, right? Because what the isometric does is it takes you at a given point in that movement pattern, right? So whereas when you do the complete movement pattern, you're only in that given point of the movement pattern at any given time, right? You're only in any moment you're in that part of the pattern. But if you do it isometrically, you can pause yourself, so you can increase your you can sort of target your strength gains to those areas. So that's something that's cool about the isometric stuff. And the other thing about isometric and plyometric stuff is that it doesn't matter how much weight you're moving, right? Like it doesn't matter if the house weighs 700 pounds or 7,000 pounds or 70,000 pounds. You're not going to move it, right? Well, I guess if it's 700, you're not. If it's 700, you probably don't want to try and lift it. It's probably someone's cottage or something. I don't know. But no, like it doesn't, if you can't lift it, it doesn't matter what it weighs, is the point that I'm trying to make. And so it's the same as with the jump, right? If you jump as high as you can, it doesn't matter how high you're going, right? It's as high as you can. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to recruit everything you got, right? When you're in the power mode, you're not going to be thinking about exhausting yourself. When you're in strength training mode, right? You're really interested in breaking down those muscle fibers, right? And so either high volume or high intensity, right? Whereas the power stuff, it doesn't necessarily work like that, right? It's more like training a movement pattern in fencing, right? The way that you get better at a movement pattern in fencing isn't by doing that same movement pattern 1,000 times. It's by doing it 5 times a day over the course of many, many days, right? And so with the power, we're sort of looking at it like that. We're not going as hard in terms of the, I mean, we are lifting heavy weights, so we are going hard in terms of the intensity, but we're not trying to maximize our volume in terms of the weight that we're moving, right? We're trying to make sure that every rep that we do counts, right? Whereas like when you're in that strength mode, going to failure is often a good way of doing it, right? Because you're trying to break the muscles, you're trying to go to failure, you're trying to make it so that they can't work anymore, right? Whereas in the power stuff, you can't do that because if you have a 225-pound barbell on your back and you try and go when your body can't, then it's just going to crush you, right? So that's not a good thing. But also, like, you know, you're trying to develop the muscle memory. It's almost as though you're trying to develop the muscle memory of what it means to move that so rapidly, right? That's the way that I want to think about power. So I'm going to begin my cycle, right, with a strength, with a focus on strength development. And that's going to last 4 to 6 weeks. And then I'm going to shift to a power development. And that's going to last probably, I tend to go less with that. So it's probably closer to 4 weeks. And then I spend the last couple of weeks fine tuning my power development by with a focus on plyos, and by plyos I mean, you know, weighted box jumps, med ball tosses, different things like that, banded axe chops, resistance band stuff, resistance band lunges, things like that. And then what I'm also getting in that last 2 weeks is I'm giving my body a break to recover, so that when I start the strength cycle again, I'm ready to start beating myself up, right? And then the question of what to do about the aerobic conditioning. So we've already talked about aerobic conditioning is going to be the kind of thing that I do twice a week, right? So you can, so it's my view that it would be, you know, you could do your aerobic conditioning in the same day that you do strength training. I tend not to. I tend to either make my day about aerobic conditioning or about strength training. But when I do my strength training, I'll often do at least a few sets of the alactic recovery. And when I say strength, I mean my resistance training, right? I'll do some alactic conditioning, recovery and output, as part of my strength training. Maybe either, you know, after. Now, if you really wanted to optimize this, if you had some time and you really wanted to prepare for a tournament, you might separate them, right? So you might do your resistance training at one part of the day, and then take 6 to 8 hours off, and then at another part of the day do your alactic recovery and output. And then if you do it that way, you're going to have better performance, and better performance is going to translate to better improvement. But then again, all of this is we're kind of starting with the assumption that you guys have unlimited time and the money to support yourself to be able to do all this stuff, right? Which is not true for any of us, probably. So there's that. I also want to talk real quick about some core exercises that I love to do. And then after that, I'm basically going to be done. So some of my favorite core stuff beyond just the lifts that we're doing. And so this core stuff is going to be stuff that I'm not doing with my regular strength training, but rather it's just going to be sort of more of almost like a conditioning thing. And that'll be stuff like Turkish get-ups, decline sit-ups with a med ball, or decline sit-ups with a Russian twist, or a captain's chair ab work, or just like a hanging like pull up dead man hang, and then windshield wiper type ab work from there, or bicycle crunches. Those are my favorite exercises for core work, and I'll do that. I'll add that to my training program once I've gotten into my second mesocycle. So I'll probably kind of skimp on those type of workouts when I'm in my first mesocycle, which is focused primarily on the heavy lifts, and I'll begin to add the more of the core conditioning exercises in the second and third mesocycle. Right, and I'll also be I'll probably be doing the alactic recovery and output during each of the mesocycles. So I may gradually intensify that as the time goes by, but I'm not going to ever not be working that part of my training. And that is the whole thing. I think I probably have more, but any questions?
Do you add flexibility training in any of this?
Yeah. there's more. There's flexibility and coordination in movement. You know, that's something that my guys will tell you that we spend a lot of time with. So we also didn't talk about warm-ups. Dynamic warm-ups are super important. Anytime you're doing anything, getting the blood going to your body, right? You're going to be better prepared. So a good rule of thumb is the better your performance in a given exercise, right, the better the results will be, right? So it's just doing the exercise is not good enough. You need to do the exercise well, right? And so that means the better prepared you are to do the exercise, the better results will be, right? Does that make sense? Everyone following the logic there, right? If you're prepared to do an exercise really well and you do it really well, then your output will be great, and then your results from that output will be great. So when it comes to flexibility, we do a lot of mobility stuff. What's really cool about the about the Olympic lifts, like especially like stuff like snatches and various like the stuff that gets you over your head like this, clean press and clean jerks, that like this requires a tremendous amount of mobility, right? Functional mobility. And then the other thing too is when you're going to snatch, very often your butt is almost touching the ground, right? So deep squats are things that you should be able to do. You know, I mean, we should all be able to do them. We very often do them at the club. My guys will endorse that, hopefully. Bob, when was the last time we did a deep squat at the club? I can't hear a word you're saying. You did unmute. Oh, there you are.
Yeah. Oh, okay. What's a deep squat? I actually don't remember.
Oh, so just going, you know, I'll do it on my chair, but just going to here.
Oh, sure. Like that's like position 1 in our club.
Right?
I didn't even know it was a deep squat.
Yeah. So, and by that, I mean, guys, just this right here, right?
Oh, good old, yeah.
Yeah. So just ass to grass, deep squat, just like be down here, right?
Especially in the wrestling.
Well, right. And the wrestling, yeah. So we didn't even really get into that. We've been talking about the fencing for the most part, but the wrestling, you know, requires a different composition and a different composition, particularly in the conditioning department, which is something that you mentioned already, Marlene, right?
Mm-hmm.
That there's a much higher focus on the aerobic conditioning, right? So we want a really, really high aerobic capacity in our wrestling. If you can't squat low, you got to work on them. Yeah, Ellie is right. Yes, no. So mobility stuff is super important. The other thing that we didn't talk about, we did talk about last time, was like how stuff like dancing helps, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what we're doing with those exercises is, right, we're learning how to sequence our movements correctly, right? So move the correct body part in the correct way at the correct time in the correct order, right? So like that is, when you dance, that's all you're doing, right? When you're fencing, it's implicit in what you're doing, right? But you know, there are various ways that we can kind of talk about how you might incorporate that into your exercises. But I tried to cover that in the beginning by saying that it's important to know what muscles we're engaging, right, and what's required of them, like what, you know, what we're trying to do, what we're trying to simulate. So for instance, like we do a lot of lateral movement in our club. We focus a lot on winding, for example. We've been doing winding for a bunch of time. Some of you have probably seen various videos that we've put up recently about winding. And so that requires like a really explosive step laterally followed by a really explosive lunge, right? You're only going to get better at that by doing that, right? Like that's, and again, we talked about that last time, that and there's a mobility and flexibility component within that, right? So it's not just the power of doing the movement, but it's the activity of doing the movement and doing it in a way that keeps your hips open, right? If I'm doing an explosive step here, and then my next step is shooting off of this leg, in this direction, right? That's what's happening with that kind of lateral footwork. I'm moving from here to here, right? That means I gotta land on this foot in such a way that the muscles are engaged in such a way that when they push off, they're gonna push me in this direction, right? That means my hips have to be out like this, right? If I'm like this and I land and my hip is this way, the direction I'm going to go is that way, right? I'm just going to continue shooting myself that way. I have to open myself up in a way that, so you can only get that through mobility. And there is lots of mobility. When I'm talking about exercise, I do a dynamic warm-up that includes mobility every single time, including stuff like the deep squat. I do leg swings. I do arm circles across the chest, etc. And then afterwards, personally, now some people can't go like hard like this, but I do 15 to 20 minutes stretching every time I lift. My kids want to kill me when they go lift with me because we just stretch for 15 to 20 minutes, and we've already been at the gym for an hour and a half, and I'm like, nope, we're doing this. But also, don't stretch before you lift. It's bad for you, right? Stretching cold is just putting stress on the muscles in a way that they're not prepared for, right? It's just like a piece of putty, right? If you take a piece of putty and it's basically warm, you can pull it apart, right? If you take a piece of putty and it's basically cold, you pull it apart, it's going to break, right? So that's how your muscles work, right? So don't stretch before you work out. Also, don't stretch before you train. Do mobility stuff, dynamic warm-ups. What do we do? We do lots of running. Here, Bob, why don't you go through our warm-up? Or no, Josiah, go through our warm-up with these kind folks.
Figure it out every time. Let's see. Usually we start off with some kind of run, like they'll do different versions of jogging, high kicks, butt kickers, stuff like that. Sometimes we do like different forms of like we do practice falling sometimes,
Right. As far as like the warm-up part, like, so we do skipping, we do jumping, we do
skipping, jogging, jumping. Trying to think what else.
We'll do like skipjacks. We'll do like inside outside, where you're like
moving. So gather steps. So like we do like shuffle steps around the gym, and then things. And then other than that, like knee rotations, ankle rotations, wrist rotations, arm rotations, all that kind of stuff. Just getting the body moving, right? Getting the body moving, getting the blood flowing, making the muscles literally warm, right? Because that's what we're doing. We're making our muscles literally warm so that they're literally more malleable than they would be otherwise. If they were cold, then they tear, right? And then the mobility stuff is super important. Like that deep squat does a lot for you, right? Deep squat and leg swings, they really open up your hips, which in my view, that's not only good. It's not only good for you in terms of being able to perform these movement patterns, but it's good technical fencing, right? So like, it's the way that you should be fencing anyway. And so yeah, totally recommend that. But we could have done the entire thing on just mobility. Anyone else or any other thing? Is that it? Wow. Okay. Last call.
So I'm figuring at the beginning, the part that I missed, you talked about how you stage your cycling, like when do you do what thing and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there a recording that I could nab of that, as opposed to having you do it all over again? Not fair.
Yeah, this lecture is actually being recorded, and as soon as it's all finished, Brent's gonna post it in the Facebook event, so you all have first come, first serve. And after that, as long as James is okay with it, we can share it on our YouTube and post it to our Toda page as well.
Yeah, so that's fine. That'll be great.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Okay. Anyone else?
What kind of dancing stuff have you guys been messing with?
I don't know. Drew,
fellas?
Bob, Josiah.
I am the prototypical white American male in that I cannot dance. So he occasionally makes me embarrass myself by attempting to dance as a practice, like warm up for wrestling. But it's basically like waltzing type stuff, right? So to match the footwork and so that you're matching footwork and you're not overcommitting or like put the kind of push pull type things that you have in jacket wrestling. It's that sort of thing. So the connection's pretty intuitive, but it's something that's so far out of my wheelhouse that it's just like, but then again, wrestling is super far out of my wheelhouse. I mean, I can't think of the last time I grabbed a guy by his jacket and flipped him onto his ass. So I guess that's fair.
Don't you miss those days?
So there's two things about the dancing that I'm going to say real quick, is that number one, it develops your coordination and it develops your timing, right? It develops your rhythm, right? So it develops your rhythm. You get a sense of where these actions belong over time, right? And when you know where actions belong in a space of time, right, you can put them there, or you can adjust that, you can tweak it, right, and you can put them places they don't belong, and that is an effective martial from a tactical perspective. Is really effective. But the other thing that I think you get from dancing that I don't know that you can get from anywhere else is integrating your flow states with your partner. Okay, so you do get it playing music. Do I have any musicians here? Anyone who plays music? Cool, I got Josiah. Anyone raise your hand who's not? There you go. Liz, you're a musician?
I'm basically relearning guitar, classical guitar.
Do you play with anybody?
No, I'm not that good at it. I took a long break after breaking my arm and I've had to switch hands, so I'm more or less having to start over.
Sure. Oh, okay. Oof, that's rough. Sorry.
Happens.
Do we have any other musicians here? Okay. So I'm going to tell you this right now, that you learn more about what it means to be a buffalo playing music with people than you will ever learn fencing. Right? I'm making that bold ass claim right now, that you will learn more about what it means to be a buffalo by playing with someone. Because the thing about playing music with someone is you have to be together, right? You have to connect yourselves to them in a way. You have to integrate their, well, I call it sort of integrating my flow state with yours, right? So we put ourselves in this place where it's almost like we're physiologically connected to each other, right? And we can feel each other, and like if I stop playing or if I slow down, like you don't keep playing the way you were, right? It doesn't even take you anything to realize, like, oh, I gotta match that. And that's what it means to play music with people. And it's called being in the pocket, right? So being in the pocket with someone is having the same groove and having the same rhythm as them and playing with them, right? And I play music with people. Like that's the kind of music that I play. It's a social music that I play with people. And the thing about it is, it's like, when someone's not in the pocket, right? Everybody knows, except for that person, right? They don't know they're not in the pocket, and that's what makes it so miserable, right? They're not fencing with feeling, right? That's what's happening, is they're not fencing with feeling. And Marlene, I'm gonna call you out a little bit because I know that you're a dancer and that you have some experience with this. And I promise you've experienced this at some point in your dance career, right? As an Irish dancer, right? Or at least, I imagine you've done lots of dance in your life. But at least as an Irish dancer, you've been dancing, right? And counting steps in your head, right? And then realized you weren't with the music anymore.
Oh, don't call me out like this. Okay, so it's interesting, right? So it's the hard shoe is one of those things where you want to practice it, so you make sure you're hitting all of the taps and clicks and stamps and scuffs the way you need to. But you also want to do it with the music. So ideally the step complements the music regardless of what music is being played. Like as long as it's in the count time that is a hornpipe or a treble jig or a reel, like your step should be within that 8 count, and you should be able to complement that music with your feet. That being said, there are times when acoustics are awful. Or like you slip or there's a misstep, right? But because it's supposed to complement the music, you hear it instantly when something goes wrong or somebody messes up. And it's like when somebody's out of the pocket, like that one person that's slightly out of tune or slightly too slow, and everyone's just kind of like,
well, exactly. Like it honestly, when I'm playing and I'm experiencing that, it physically hurts me. I'm physically in pain. And there are times where I've left gigs where I was physically in pain for so long that I had to recover. Like I had to go physically recover from that experience. You know, like, but when, you know, I'm just recalling various times, like even, and as a young dancer, as a young person who's learning music, you're gonna do it. Everyone's gonna do it. You have the steps in your head. You have the notes in your head. You have the techniques in your head, right? That you know you're supposed to do. I'm supposed to do this technique. It goes like this, 1, 2, 3. But you're not in the pocket. You're not fueling, right? You're not feeling your opponent, and you're not integrated with them in such a way that you can immediately respond to what they're doing, right? That's what fueling.
So you miss your indes.
Right, and yeah, you can't see the indes, right? If it's not, you can't be indes if you're not fueling what your opponent's doing, because and you can't feel if all you're doing is thinking, right? If all you're doing is thinking about what step 1, step 2, right? Or in you know, in your case, you know, jumping, batter, hopping, toe, and batter, hopping back, right? Or whatever it is, and then it's like, oh, the music is gone, right? Right? And now you got to figure out where the hell you're at because you weren't in the pot. And I'm not accusing you of that. I couldn't know, right? I've never seen you dance, so I can't accuse you of being of this being a problem that you have. But I know that everyone goes through it at some point in their career, because you have to learn to get out of that, right? You have to learn to get past that. So yeah, so talking about dancing, we do dance on a regular basis. It teaches us, it teaches us feeling, it teaches us balance, and it teaches us structure, right? To be strong without pushing, right? And it teaches us rhythm, to be able to put our actions in the appropriate place in the irreversible flux of time, right? To put our actions.
I like that. The irreversible flux.
Right. All right. Anyone else? All right. So my most important takeaway is what?
Squats.
Squats. Squats are the best, and dancing. And I hope I answered all your questions. And it was enjoyable for me. So,
and you have a 3rd installment that you're planning, yes?
I do have a 3rd installment that I'm planning, and what the 3rd installment is going to be is what is fencing.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so good luck with that, right? But Marlene, you and I will get together and figure out when we're going to answer that question.
Absolutely.
But in the meantime, I hope you guys have some a useful roadmap to getting yourself in a physical readiness program that's going to achieve all of the things that you want it to.
Absolutely. This is actually perfect, because we've started doing monthly challenges since we can't meet in person. So December's upper body, shoulders. So we're each taking turns building I guess you would call it a micro cycle, where we have a week of exercises that we're doing, and Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's like, here's the video, here's what we're doing this week, do as many as you can, let us know how many reps you get or whatever it is, to kind of build this into a habit for people,
right?
And to just give them exposure to these various movements that they can then take and do on their own.
Cool.
So feel free to participate in, I don't know,
the challenges.
Yeah, critique as we go along.
Well, yeah, I'm not an expert on this stuff. I just know because I've looked at it, right? So like, I think that's sort of that's another takeaway that I want you guys to really take from this is that, or at least for me, like, I think we can do a lot, we can achieve a lot by just trying to think critically about what we're doing, right? And not just haphazardly. Now, on the other hand, maybe you're not going to do it otherwise. And maybe that's the critical thought that we need to give it, right? Is like, hey, this is a push-up challenge, and that's the only way I'm going to get some engagement by people. And so that's good enough, right? That's okay too. But, you know, if we're thinking like, I want to be an elite athlete and be physically optimized for the sport that I'm competing in, for a given tournament or whatever, right? We should also at least have an understanding of how we might set about doing that, right? And then we can make the decision after, like, to what degree am I interested in pursuing it? To what degree is the discomfort too intimidating? You know, to be perfectly frank. I mean, it has been for me. I kind of have, the last few weeks has been really rough for me. You know, between the COVID and various things that have gone on, my training has really fallen off quite a bit. But like, you know, all of those factors are part of it. And that's a lot of times that's where the variety and diversity in your training regimen comes into play, right? It doesn't just give you better performance, better, more well-rounded performance, but also it gives your brain a break to let it, you know. All right. Any other questions? I think I am done. And so I'll get with you, Marlene, soon. And we'll
whenever you're ready.
Yeah, great. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting. That was cool.
Yeah,
for sure.
Thanks, Capital CKDF.
Anytime. Happy to do it. All right. And I think we're good to